cleans us when we're beaten up, and always receives the prodigals. Chastises when the time is called, and raises sons. That's what the Father does. He formed us all into the image of one, and paid the price before the world begun. Save the ones that we would have given up. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Father's Perspective. I finally have an official title. I've been kind of playing around with different titles, and so now the third time is the charm. It has a real title. I hope you have been blessed by the first two episodes. I want to just give a shout out to Calvin and to Bert. But we're just going to continue these conversations with men that I know and trust, and who I know have been good stewards of the things and the people in which God has, sort of given to their care. So tonight with me, I have a really good friend, good brother, wonderful father and husband, man that I've known a long time, probably one of the closest men to my own life personally. I got my good friend Emmanuel on. Emmanuel, why don't you say hello to the people?
What's up, people? Prayer for you guys remaining safe and strong. Thank you, AJ, for having me on the Father's to get the perspective from a father. I too am grateful for this guy, AJ. I've known him for years, man. Great man of God, great husband, great father. ... The list goes on.
Right. Well, yeah, since you already sort of brokered that, why don't you, let's give a little background of yourself, share with the people a little bit about yourself and how long we've known each other. I could tell them, but they might think I'm a little biased because this is my thing. So why don't you share a little bit about, how we got to know each other and just kind of where, who you are and where you are right now.
Yep. All right. Well, Emmanuel Fields. I'm actually the son of a pastor. My parents are pastors. My dad's a pastor. My mom is a co-pastor. Redeemer Love Outreach Center. They've been pastoring for 35 years. And I have a twin brother and a younger sister. My twin brother, he's the oldest, about 19 minutes. And my sister, she's, even though people think I'm the oldest, but anyway, that's not for a father's perspective. That's a brother's perspective.
Right.
But we love the Lord. It's just interesting growing up in the house of a pastor because you get the pastor's kids kind of sort of stigma of they're just bad as all get out, and then everybody looks to them to be these perfect kids. But just growing up, for me, I've always been titled as the church boy. So I've always been the one who took my relationship serious from an early age, elementary to middle school to high school, even to the point of not even going to prom. I didn't even go to my high school prom. There was a group of believers that we went to this alternative to prom called Praise Rama, which is like a Christian prom, because we were so serious about our walk that we were like, let's just try to do something different. And then even in elementary school, I remember going to the basketball court with my brother and just even sharing the gospel with the guys at the basketball court, the boys at the basketball court, trying not to curse and different things, listen to secular music, all sorts of things, just at an early age. And then it spilled over into high school and college when I attended University of Maryland Shore, and that's where I met AJ. I believe it was in '97 that we met through Praise Fellowship. It's a Christian organization on campus. They would have Bible studies on Wednesday nights. I think it was in Wilson Hall. And from there, we just built a relationship. I know AJ got saved at Praise Fellowship with the president at the time, Kwasi Jima, and Danita Johnson Platt is her last name now. She was instrumental as well, and just another, all sorts of other believers there just at that Praise Fellowship. That's where we met, and then we just became really close friends. I don't know if you remember the day that I asked you and Arthur to be that
Oh
we
yeah,
all,
yeah, I
the
remember
three
that.
of
Yeah,
us could be best friends.
yeah. This guy, he called
Like,
me
look
over
at
there.
this
Yeah,
corny dude
yeah.
coming up.
He called me over to his place. He was like,
Like, yeah,
"Man, I
let's just
gotta,
be best
I need
friends.
to talk to you. I need to talk to you." And I was like, "What's going on, man? Can we just meet? I gotta talk." And I was like, "All right." Ran over there. He's like, "We should just be really good friends, man. We should be best friends." And I was like, "Okay, sure." That works for me.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Whatever. All right, let's go play some ball now.
Right, but that's actually really good because things like that, as a young man, you don't take take into account is sort of like drawing lines in the sand, like letting your yay be yay and your nay be nay, as the scriptures would say. And so it's like, as an older man, you see things like that, because that's what I love to do now in my life. I always want to make sure that things are clarified. Hey, what is it? Like, what is this? Are we doing this? Or are we not doing that? And so, but as a young man, sometimes you'll sort of just kind of let things go and be like, whatever. We just kind of doing whatever. So it's like, looking back on that now, it's like, oh yeah, that actually probably made sense to sort of be clear on your intentions for even being in a relationship with somebody, even if it's a friendship. Just saying, hey, listen, I feel like the Lord's knitting our heart together. We should really press into some things like that. So it's a really something that I've grown to appreciate as I've gotten older, that I probably did not appreciate as much being, I don't know, was that 19, 20 or whatever. So you guys are getting all the background here tonight. Yeah, so I've known Emmanuel over 20 years now, probably like closer to 25. It's been, like I said, been just a wonderful asset to my life, and I thought would be an excellent person to have one of these conversations with. So I thought it would just be really cool. We just start talking about some of the things that I've been thinking about, and I know you've probably been thinking about as well, and see where the Lord takes us over the next 30, 40 minutes, and hopefully this is a fruitful conversation. So one of the things that, because you just mentioned about being saved and things like that, that's sometimes I know me personally, I don't even use that terminology as much anymore. You just kind of, when you see people living for the Lord, you just see the fruit of their life. As when you were younger, you're like, are you saved? Do you know the Lord? And it's like, now I'm more of a fruit inspector. And one of the other things that I sort of look at with that viewpoint is like the notion of God as Father. Like, people say, oh, God's your Father. He's your Heavenly Father. And, one of the things that I think that we miss as believers is we don't take into account that people sometimes have really skewed and weird things they think about when they think about Father. Like, it doesn't just come to like this really nice, mental picture. A lot of times people have a really weird, they may have a lot of baggage in their past as it pertains to Father. And so, like, what comes to your mind? What sort of things come to your mind when you think of the concept of Father and God as Father? What sort of pictures and images come to your mind?
Well, for me, as you say that, I also want to let the people know that I'm married to my lovely wife, Kimberly, and I have 4 children. Madison is 11, Matthew is 8, Maxton is 6, and we have a newborn who today is 7 weeks. Her name is McKenna. And so it's interesting, when I think of Father, I think of, first I think of God as our Father. Then I think of such a huge responsibility, man, that fathers have. And also when I think of Father, I think of how so many have shunned that responsibility, and they don't realize the blessing that's in being a father. So it's just not just a responsibility; it's an overwhelming blessing, just to be able to father and to have your children look up to you as a father. And so one thing that I realized, though, is that being a father is not, when it comes to the family, it's not even my primary responsibility. Like, loving my wife and the responsibility that I have for her, she's the priority for me. And then that relationship that is developed, and we've built upon it. We built and developed and realizing that we haven't gotten to the place that we need to be. Things are good, things are great, but like every champion says, they're always looking for things to be better. And so even when people look at our marriage and look at our family, and look at me as a father, and they say, you're doing a great job, I always say, in my mind, I'm saying thank you. I say thank you, but in my mind, I'm saying it's still so much work that I have to do. Right. There's so much learning, so much. It's almost as though in my mind, when they say that I'm doing a great job, I take it another way and saying, okay, you know what? It's something that I'm just not doing right, or there's just more that I got to do, because I realize that I'll never get to the place where I can sit back and say, there may be a time when they're off on their own and they're grown and they're adults and they're out the house, but at least for now, until that time comes, I'll never feel comfortable getting to a place of saying, oh, you know what, I'm doing a great job. Like, I'm beating my chest, and no matter what accolades my kids may get, or what success they may have, I still feel as a father, there's still so much work that needs to be done. Spiritual, physical, financial, mental, socially, all sorts of different things in multiple areas, just trying to be the best that I can for my kids. And I take it from looking really at the scriptures from Deuteronomy 6 all the way up through Ephesians. I mean, the Lord makes it really clear, the father's responsibility in terms of their children, raising his children, discipling the family, and the list goes on. And so when I think of father, the picture that comes to me is first of all God, and the relationship that God has with the Father has with the Son in the Trinity. Then I start to think of the church, the relationship that Christ has with the church, because that mirrors the relationship that I have with my wife. And then the children come in as my wife submits to me, I submit to Christ, and Christ is the head of the church. And then what we do as a husband and wife is our children obey us as parents. And so together my wife and I say, hey, our responsibility now together becomes our children. But me being a good father really comes from the practice and the time that I've had in focusing on being a good husband to my wife. And so those are sort of the things I kind of look at when people talk about father, when people talk about family. And one of the things that I do is I've always been a man of perspective. So it's interesting that your thing is titled A Father's Perspective, because perspective is what drives me. And I use, for example, real quick, that when I walk to work, I have to go underneath a bridge. It's over there at K Street. And I work at Aussie on 1st Street, 250 1st Street. And I walk underneath the bridge, and that bridge is a line of tents of homeless people that's their residence. Right. And so for me, every day I walk to work, it's perspective for me. So I look, and I'm looking at someone who's having a life that's more challenging than me in certain regards. So when I step foot into my job, and I have to deal with a division that's having issues with their budget, or I'm frustrated with, whether or not they're going to spend their money, perspective for me says, you know what, this is nothing. What are you complaining about? This is not true hardship. You just walk through someone who's facing challenges that's a little more challenging than you are. So perspective helps me. It keeps me grounded. And so that's what helps me, even when it comes to my relationship with my kids, and just trying to be a godfather and not just a good father.
That's good.
You know?
That's a really good perspective. I like that you mentioned the fact that you take not just a physical or financial responsibility, but also a spiritual and mental, emotional responsibility with your kids, because I think that that's also very important to build their confidence, build them up, so that they never. One of the things that I realize now from my own life, and I make sure to remind my kids of, and even instill in them, is that so that you would never have to look to another man. Nothing against other men, but that you would never have to look to another man for leadership or for guidance in serious matters of the heart. Now, there may be specific specialties that you may have mentors for, and I'm all for that. But what I'm talking about is matters of the heart, weighty matters of the heart, that you would never have to go out and search for God to send you someone to be able to walk you through those weighty matters, because God has already sent you a father. So that's really an awesome perspective, to really realize that I'm not content in my fathering. There's always deeper depths that I can go, not only with my children, but you also mentioned a really great point, was your wife. And that's definitely one of my next thoughts that I just wanted to bounce around, is because it's children seeing a man love his wife. So much emphasis in the body is placed on the submission of the woman to the man, which is it's a given, but not as much emphasis is placed on the man expressing God's love for his wife. There's so many passages where Christ would say, "This is what I do with my bride, and this is what I want you to do with your bride." And entreat her. And so talk to me about how you and your wife relate, and how do you think that is a benefit to your children? How have you seen that you and your wife, or particularly you loving your wife, how has that benefited your children?
Man, it's been a tremendous benefit to my kids. One of the things that I share with a few people that I talked to about our marriage is that this term submission really was never meant to be something that was supposed to be something that's depressing. It's something that really, when done, it's for protection. It's for provision. It's so many different things in submission, and really, when done correctly, your wife will actually desire it. It's a place that they delight to be in, because of security. It's all sorts of things that's just there. And so when the husband, and what I do is I focus so much on loving my wife like Christ loved the church, as the scripture says in Ephesians 5, and gave up himself for her. So what I find myself doing is I find myself giving up so much of some of my desires or some of my things that I really think that is primary. I put my wife's responsibilities or desires ahead of my responsibilities or desires. And what that does is that allows the kids to see what true sacrifice is and what true love is, because they see it demonstrated. So they don't see me just preaching about it or teaching about it or talking about it. They have a real life example of what it means to give up themselves. And so oftentimes they see, okay, well, daddy's giving up himself for mommy. I can then see how I can be obedient in different things that they're telling me to do, because I see my father being obedient to the scriptures. And so where that's helped us out is it's allowed me as a father, and allowed my wife as a mother to be able to not just teach, but to be living examples of the word, and then see the delight in it. Because oftentimes people think of scriptures as a requirement, or legalistically, or hey, there's a set of rules and regulations, and it puts people in chains, it binds them. You can't do this, you can't do that. And they don't see the freedom They don't see the benefit, the joy in doing it. So a lot of times when people look at our marriage and they say, man, you guys, man, how do y'all do it? Y'all don't fuss, y'all don't fight. You're managing your finances. What is it? Man, it really is just looking at the scriptures and then me giving up myself for it. So it's just like, I just think so much about giving up myself. So I give up myself for my wife. I give up myself for my kids. It's a life of service. And so when I find myself doing that, with the joy that I get from seeing how things run smoothly and how things fit, all the pieces fit together is a reward enough for me. It's not so much of a chore. I mean, yeah, realistically speaking, sometimes you do want to say, hey, I'm coming from work and it don't bother me, leave me alone. I don't feel like, just let me have my space, leave me alone, bad day, whatever. But the reality is, when you see yourself sacrificing and you see the benefits and you see not just from your wife being happy with it just being a happy wife, happy life, but also you see kids when you walk into the door from work, running up to you, hugging you, kissing, wanting to talk to you, wanting to spend time with you, love homeschooling, love their brothers and their sisters. It's like, okay, all right, now this, I know I'm in a good place because there's so many different things that you can cross off the list that are saying we're in a good place that's happening from me as the father and as the husband doing what he should be doing. And so that's one of the benefits that I've seen my kids just kind of understanding and growing. Each of them have their own way because, again, 11, 8, and 6 for the 3, but able to sit down through family time and explain different things. This is what's going on. This is what's happening, X, Y, and Z. And it's really been a blessing for our family.
Yeah, that's great, man, because, what I hear as you're talking is leading your family. One of the things that really grieves me sometimes is when you hear a lot of guys, beat their chest and talk about how, I'm doing this for my family or I'm leading my family. And I'm thinking like, bro, like, what are you talking about right now? Like, I see how you live. Like, sometimes people forget that you know them. Like, man, I know how you live. What do you mean lead your family? And so, what I think of things like that, like seeds, because you don't realize, okay, you're not willing to, because what you're talking about is dying to yourself. And, it's like when you're not willing to die to yourself, okay, you may not see the repercussions immediately, but it's like that seed planted in the ground. When you will see the repercussions, when your children are adults and they don't respect you or they've never really honored you, and you realize, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, all of that has been built up over a lifetime of a father not willing to do some of the things that you were talking about, not willing to deny himself, die to his own desires in order that his children might live. Paul says that. Paul says, we die daily, right, so that you all might live, right? I'm dying so that you all can live, right? I'm willing to allow certain aspects of my heart to die, maybe certain dreams, maybe certain aspirations may have to just die because it needs to produce life in you. That's the word. Yeah, that's what it says. It produces life in you. The death in me produces life in you. And so that's a really wonderful illustration, man. It just showed that many times in order to be successful with our own children, a lot of it's not, the latest little, book that I just read, but it's literally just me being willing to, man, am I willing to die? Am I willing to just lay myself down? Because that's what it's going to really take in order for my children to succeed or my wife even to flourish in some things. I may have to just be willing to lay myself down. And that takes a level of maturity as well as humility. So with that being said, I know you really went into it a lot. So why is it so important? And this is another shift. So as we're talking about just children, one of the ways that I have found in order to make myself more available, not only to my wife and to my children, but to those whom the Lord has connected me to, one of the ways in which I've had to die to myself is just choosing to live a modest lifestyle, whether that's financially, whether that is socially, just not doing a lot. Sometimes you just kind of have to be, a little bit at peace. And what I have found is it's made me a lot more available, and it's given me a lot more time to be able to die to myself in a lot of areas where I wouldn't have been thinking about it because I would have been doing so much. But now just not doing so much, it's given me the time to be like, man, I need to put this down so that I can, a lot of people know that I used to do music. And I remember one of the things that God told me probably about 5 or 6 years ago when my youngest, Emmanuel, was born, felt like the Spirit was like, you need to put down the music. It is a competing interest in your heart right now. And who knows? I may never pick it up again, whatever. But just realizing, wow, I have to lay some things down for the sake of those whom God has given to me. It's kind of like ruling righteously. So how do you see living modestly as a benefit, or have you seen it as a benefit to you as a husband, as a father, just as a son of God, just sort of living your life? Have you seen being modest in your lifestyle as a benefit?
Most definitely. And not just even from what I've seen, but just what I've heard from those that I've talked to and look at my marriage, look at my family, and just see a difference. And one of the things that when I talk to people, for me, it comes down to, again, perspective, but it also comes down to just sitting down, like you were saying earlier. Just have a seat, sit back, relax, just think about a few things. And when you really start to think, people they equate different actions to different titles. And so for instance, you'll see a man and a woman arguing, and the first thing that a lot of people say is, oh, they must be married. Y'all sound like a married couple. Right. And so then people look at marriage that way as, okay, what's a sign of a marriage? Right. Is a man and a woman arguing. And so I'm looking at this saying, well, okay, really, that's not what the scriptures define as marriage, and I certainly don't. If I'm seeing that people are looking at that as the norm for marriage, then I don't want that to be what defines my marriage. And so I'm already looking at modestly going against the norm, just based upon what people have defined marriage to be on certain actions. Not only just marriage, but just when you even look at finances, when you look at almost 90% of the world families are in debt. So when you look at that, you say, well, okay, so it's normal to be in debt. So then you say, well, I don't want to be defined. Why would normal, or why would a definition for marriage or a family in my house be that we be a house that's also in debt and that be the norm? Well, let me see if I can change that and go against the norm. And so for me, it's been, I sit back and I look at things like that and I say, well, you know what? If they're saying this is the norm, let me sit back and think. Another example is homeschooling. You sit back and say, well, homeschoolers make up about maybe 3%, maybe about 3% of homeschool or kids are homeschooled. As you say, all right, well, people kind of have this mentality that by default, what you're supposed to do is send your kids to school. Is that necessarily the way that we should be thinking? And you look at it from a biblical perspective, and then you sit back and you start thinking about things. Well, okay, what if we just take the time to think about this? Does it have to be that I have to school? Does it have to be A, B, and C? From there, that's how I just started saying, well, you know what? I don't got to be in debt. I don't have to send my kids off to school. I don't have to be the family that's defined, or the husband and wife that's defined as arguing, fussing, not communicating. and that's the norm, I just decided to go. I'll be that family or that guy that goes against the norm. And so from there, I take that approach, and then I look at the scriptures to say, okay, how can I make sure that what I'm doing, my perspective aligns with having a biblical perspective. And the Bible talks about modesty and the pearl and just integrity and good stewardship, that nature. And so I found myself in that space and in that place saying, okay, let me take a step back and just look. And I've always been that way. I distinctly remember my dad always telling my brother and sister not to listen to me, because I was always the child that didn't go with what was just being said. I was always the one to be like, well, I don't know. I don't mean to be disobedient or non-compliant or insubordinate, whatever you want to call it. I'm not trying to be, but I just think that there may be maybe we just need to take the time to think a little bit more about it, and we may conclude to somewhere else. It may be a different conclusion, different reaction or outcome. And so I've always kind of been like that. And so it's just now more evident with, in terms of my marriage, in terms of me being a father, and just applying biblical principles and just sitting back and just saying, well, all right, let's try to not go with what people would say the norm is. So I'll be abnormal. And then I'm finding now through situations like the coronavirus, where that modest approach or good stewardship, now you're sitting in a good place, because you're looking at modesty got us to be able to be straight financially, have an emergency fund, not splurging on different things, being secure, and even in a position of reaching out to people, say, hey, if you guys need financial assistance, hit me up, let me know.
Right.
We've got plenty. God has blessed us, and it's come from that sort of a modest mentality.
That's really good, man. Yeah, being the lender and not the borrower. I think that it's so, a lot of times we as believers, we talk a lot about being countercultural, right? We're going to be countercultural. But in the way that we live, it's very rare. We don't realize how much sometimes society has seeped into the way even we live. And it's not until you do something that's different that you realize, oh man, yeah, everybody does this, doesn't it? And then you're looked at as the oddball, but in actuality, that's normal. There's a book that I read, oh man, it's called The House. God, it's by Dr. Corbett Galden. I forget the name of the book, but he writes. There's a line in the book in which he says he uses the word normal, and then he sort of parenthetically says, "Now I want to just clarify. When I say normal, I'm talking about normal in terms of biblical worldview. I'm not saying normal like normal society. So when you guys see what I'm talking and you say, well, that's not normal, the perspective that I'm coming from is from a biblical worldview. And so a lot of what you just said is normal from a biblical worldview, right? I should be modest. I should be a little bit more responsible. I should be this. I should be that. And it's not normal as you think about it from a earthly perspective. It makes no sense. You should be doing this, man. You got this, you got that, and you homeschool, and black folks don't do that. What are you talking about? Right. It's like all those different things. But it's like, well, it's a countercultural way of thinking. It's a countercultural way of living. And those are sort of what God has called us. He's called us to those things, and we have to be willing. Again, I think it sort of ties into our earlier, the early part of the conversation. It was dying to self. Oh, the book was called The Birth of the Holy Nation. Yeah, I had to dig it up. Sometimes some things get in your mind and you can't get it out. But it was an excellent book. But he just talked about that term normal. So, as we sort of round third base here, man, I wanted to touch on something that I think is really good, and something that I've tried to practice now, especially with my older two children. Having a teenager is like a whole different animal now. It's like God sort of has to get you out your comfort zone, and I'm finding myself doing and talking about things, and I'm like, man, should I be doing this as a parent? But you realize your child is no longer like a little kid anymore. They're like becoming, an adult. And so, how do you sort of work to balance the spiritual life and family life? You know, because they kind of take on a symbiotic relationship as your kids get older. You know, when it's little, you just say, you know, Jesus loves you, honey. You know, but as they get older and they begin to have more complex thought and really begin to have very complex questions and are, you know, really challenging a lot of things. You know, I know me personally, I have found myself having to really work at making sure that my spiritual life is fully integrated into, you know, natural life. So I know I found a lot of times now with my kids, particularly my oldest two, I'll say things like, well, don't just not do that because daddy told you. Let me show you why you shouldn't do that. And we'll go into the scriptures. You know, my oldest and I, we just had a long discussion about Philippians 4, you know, and because something else was going on. I said, honey, this is in the scriptures. You need to look at what Paul was talking about, you know, when he was saying whatever things be pure, whatever things are holy, think on those things. And now but it sort of went from a disciplinary thing right into like a really, you know, a more spiritual conversation. And so how do you work to sort of bring that balance and, you know, really integrate those things together as you're, you know, continuing to raise your children and just, you know, be better at being a more spiritual father, so to speak?
It's a good question. I actually do it several ways. One thing that I do is I try to make sure that we consistently spend time together as a family, reading the word, having family worship. And what I mean consistently, it doesn't necessarily mean it's every day. Some weeks are better than other weeks.
You mean y'all don't live in heaven every day, right?
Exactly. I want folks thinking that, you know, we got a schedule and this dude is, you know, on it and disciplined. Nah, what the reason why we do it is, you know, for them to see the value. You get an understanding of God and His Word, but to see that it's important. It's important, the value, and that, you know, it's somewhat consistent where we're coming together, where you can spend time watching a family movie. Yeah, that's nice, but we also want to come together as a family and read the word and sing and pray and things of that nature. So That's one thing that we do. The other thing is, like you've done, is just those times where, and I've actually found this to actually really be more of the time where they are more obedient from this, and that is when I do bring the scriptures in, like when it's not just daddy said it and do it because daddy said. When I'm able to bring the scripture in or bring some sort of a biblical perspective or principle from the scriptures, and they view God, and this is a blessing for my kids, and I think it's because we spent the time. My kids view God as someone who is God, and I as their daddy cannot compare to him. Like he is the creator and he is the man. Like he is. So if God, you know, if God said to do this, you know, who is daddy to but what God has said? And so that has actually helped in terms of them being obedient, particularly with my daughter, from it coming from me, because, you know, when it's mom and the daughter, you know, sometimes it's like black on black crime. You know, that's a whole nother that'd be from a mother's perspective.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Sometimes my oldest, her and my wife get into it, man. It's like, woof. Let me leave the room. Yeah. We're not abdicating our responsibilities, ladies and gentlemen. But for the mothers out there, you know, sometimes mother and daughter got to lock horns on a woman level. Sometimes, you know.
Yeah. Yes, they do. And then I had to step in and let my daughter know. Listen, that's my wife. She's your mother, but she's my wife first. You know, she is the queen. When she says go, you got to respect her. ABC. But me stepping in and really kind of walking my daughter through the scriptures and just having that conversation where, you know, I sit on her bed and say, you know, this, from a daddy's perspective, giving her what is and what isn't from the biblical perspective. And so that is actually those. the beauty in it, and the reward I get sometimes is not only just them obeying, but them actually coming to you and saying, thank you for the conversation, or I heard what you said the other day, and I thank you, and I think that I understood what you were saying, and I understand the scriptures. Or they'll ask a question, Daddy, when you were saying this the other day, is this an example like this? Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Good. So you've been listening. Good. All right. It's that sort of thing that I see happening with my kids when we discipline them, or when we're trying to make sure that we balance what happens daily, the challenges in life, and making sure that they understand things from a biblical perspective. And so, especially with technology, I love technology. It's a blessing. Even I think people are appreciating it even more. Those that didn't have an appreciation for it prior to COVID-19 are now kind of sort of appreciating it more, when being able to stay in contact with their family, things of that nature. But what I also know is that there's a negative and a downside to technology, with kids having access to it so much. They're just different things that, YouTube videos, or even some of the television shows where they're teaching their subliminal messages, or they have different things that they're saying that we disagree with. So then we have to go sit down and have a conversation and talk to them about that, and give them a biblical perspective on it. So it's just different things like that, where we try to make sure that we put the time in now at a young age, so that when they do get to the teenage years, they would have had so many years of us just spending time with them and making sure that we give them the correct perspective, and just pray and hope and pray as they move into adulthood, and they move away from the house, that they hold on to those things that they were taught at the earlier ages.
That's great, man, because it's what really sparked that question is, I remember a friend of mine calling me probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, right when COVID-19 really broke out. And it's a really good friend of mine, so he knows how I live. And he's like, man, I just want to commend you, man, because he's like, I've been seeing all this stuff going on the news, and people might be losing their jobs, and people, got to have their kids come home and deal with their kids now. He's like, y'all been doing this since forever. He's like, he was like, and he's like, it's almost like y'all been living crisis proof. And I appreciated the sentiment. I'm not there. I don't have a life that's above crises. But right. I understand his sentiment. He was just really, it's an admonishment that, as men with vision, sometimes we have to go before and go ahead and sort of, take out the giant, so to speak, so that those coming behind, don't have, that's a principle of the kingdom, that, those who've gone before, our work is going to be harder. It's going to be inherently harder, so that those who come behind us don't have to work as hard. And it's not really about lazy or anything like that. It's just the nature of the kingdom. They're able, our ceiling is their floor. A lot of times I hate that mentality, and people be like, well, look, I had to work hard, so you're going to work hard. I don't care. And it's like, well, man, right. But you're a father. Like, they shouldn't have to work as hard as you work. That's why you're there. Sometimes people don't realize that sometimes. That God sent you there so that they wouldn't have to repeat some of the same mistakes and pitfalls that you had to do. So, man, listen, E, I do thank you for joining me. If anybody wanted to reach out to you for had any questions or any thoughts, is there any way that people could hit you up?
You can. I'm on Facebook. You just go on Facebook, type in Emmanuel Fields. Other than that's probably it for my social media.
Yeah.
Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, or whatever.
It's been really cool because that's how I was. I wasn't really into social, but one of the cool things about doing this media thing, it's really allowed me and my daughter to work together a lot more. So she's actually been doing a lot of my social media stuff, and so it's really kind of got us a little bit closer because I'm like, all right, hey, listen, Dad, I need this, I need that. She's like, all right, Dad, I'm on it. So we're able to really work because I'm like, listen, I wasn't hardly on Facebook anyway. I was hardly on Facebook at all anyway. So this has been really cool. But listen, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, there are sound voices in the earth. You don't have to get caught up in the paranoia, or the hysteria just because there are viruses or things going on. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars and all the things that the Bible talks about. But in the midst of all of that, I think that the Father still has sound voices in the earth, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have shared one of those with you this evening. So again, man, thanks a whole lot, man, for jumping on tonight. And folks, if you want to listen to more of these conversations, please hit the like and subscribe button down below, or you can visit our website. Again, that's divemedia.co. And until the next time, this is AJ saying bye-bye. Cleanses when we're beaten up and always receives the prodigals. Chastises when the time is called and raises sons. That's what the Father does. He formed us all into the image of one and paid the price before the world begun. Saves the ones that we would have given up. Raises sons. That's what the Father does. He cleanses when we're beaten up and always receives the prodigals. Chastises when the time is called and raises sons. That's what the Father does. He formed us all into the image of one and paid the price before the world begun. Saves the ones that we would have given up. Raises sons. That's what the Father does.